Hey guys, Cure8428 here, and welcome to my channel. This is a really spur-of-the-moment thing I decided to do, but every so often I decided that I would make some Speedpaint videos. Since I draw every waking moment already, I also thought that I might as well tell you the story of some of the characters I draw, seeing as I mostly draw people who need better backstories. The link to my DeviantArt page, where you can see said characters and other stuff, will be in the description below. The person we're drawing up today is Riklaugath Dabban. He is a prominent character in the backstory of the Aasimar I play in a D&D campaign, Malachi. And I've been meaning to get his face down onto an image for a while now, so here he is. And while this tale does mention him a lot, it is mostly about Malachi since it's his origin story. So depending on how this goes, I might do a speed paint of the two of them, maybe even including some of the other characters involved in that story, so yeah. Our story starts in a farming village located right in the middle of nowhere, where a couple, Arthur and Helvisa Armorose, live. Those names were randomly generated, by the way. The two of them were humans. Arthur was a lean and handsome man with thick brown hair tied in a ponytail all the time, and kind blue eyes. He enjoyed studying history and magic throughout the day, while also reminding me of a Disney prince. On occasion, he would go hunting with his owl Archie, but more often than not, he was reading books or bringing them home to show his fond wife. And by fond, I mean she would sigh while waving it over to a bookcase that was so heavy the wood floor was dented. Helvisa, meanwhile, was a courteous woman who worked in the tavern serving drinks, and when she wasn't there, she was baking pies or hunting with her husband. She had a head of luscious black hair that reached down to her back and pale green eyes. They lived in that village ever since they were young, working hard to make ends meet in the small town every step of the way. Not much happened in their village anyway, so there wasn't much more they could do besides work. And other things that resulted in baby Malachi 9 months later. And this baby, an adorable little thing by the way, was nigh literally an angel. His eyes were purely green, no pupils nor irises at all. They had a faint glow that enraptured everyone who looked into them. His skin was pale, and his hair was stark black and incredibly soft. Think Marvel's Loki, but with pure green eyes and as a baby. It's adorable. I love him. Anyway, for the first few years, Malachi's parents found their life to be super easy. Their son, though curious, rarely fussed or made a racket. He tended to play by himself, but he wasn't shy either. He enjoyed babbling with other kids his age and loved making them smile. This parenting thing was fucking easy. Ha ha ha. Oh boy. Malachi's most adorable moment was during the night, when his parents brought him outside to see the stars for the first time. His green eyes lit up in excitement upon seeing them, and he immediately held up his hands to try and grab one. Instead, though, little sparks flew from his hands. His parents were surprised, but became even more so when he made an orb of light to play with, only to throw it in the hopes of making another star. And after that, Malachi fell in love with magic. Not only did Malachi love magic, he also loved reading. As a 5-year-old, he would pull books off of the lowest shelves and try to understand them, or he would ask his father about them. It was also at age 5 when Malachi approached Arthur with a question the man hadn't been prepared to answer. And no, it wasn't about why those people were wrestling so weird. Malachi held up a book containing a picture that was a different kind of concerning and asked what was happening. Arthur, nervous and unsure, carefully tried to explain the concept of murder to a toddler without making it sound exciting. He failed. Miserably. Dear Lord, man, you had one job. He then attempted to tell Malachi why it was actually wrong, but it fell on deaf ears as the Aasimar stared at the picture like it was the most interesting thing in the world. The next night, he'd recreated the picture with a rabbit he'd found. Parenting. Not fucking easy. When Malachi turned 10, he started experimenting with his magical capabilities. He practiced every single day, finding out how to do new things like make fires flicker or cause a ground to tremor. He scared a lot of people when he first learned how to slam a door shut, and every time he giggled. And while he could swear something was telling him not to do this, he could never find the source and eventually flat out ignored it, like every child when someone tries to logically tell them not to do what they like doing. Malachi much preferred growing magically more powerful, especially with his healing spells. After all, if he could heal an animal, he could test more spells out against it. That logic wasn't blatantly ignored and terrified Malachi's parents, who tried to stop this growing wickedness. They begged priests for help, asked the heavens for guidance, bought mysterious herbs from strangers. Nothing really worked. Malachi usually just pretended some of them did. He didn't like being dragged around town for cures, and so he kept his actions to himself some more. It wasn't particularly enjoyable to do so. Hell, it was borderline disheartening to the little murdered child. But he'd rather pretend and make his family happy than to be alone, no matter how much he liked what he did. But everything changed one foggy day when a mysterious drow came to town. Donned in long robes and a dark cloak was a mage who'd seemed utterly lost upon arriving in the village and very suspicious, what with seemingly radiating evil and all. He had walked around for quite some time in search of directions before he found an Aasimar, sitting outside and playing with something on the ground in front of his house. The mage cautiously approached and asked for the boy's name, and if his parents were around, fearing he might have found the spawn of beings he'd rather not meet face to face in the near future. He liked existing quite a lot at the moment. And then he blinked, noticing that this child's hands were red and clawing into a bird. And as it would do to anybody else, the sight of some kid giving this bird another mouth drew the drow's attention. Maybe not for lawful reasons. No, not those. Get your head out of the gutter. He's 10. The drow asked Malachi why he was making mashed carcass, and the boy had merely replied that it was for an experiment. When he was asked to perform an experiment for the drow so he could figure out what the fuck that meant, Malachi instantly stood up and began the cycle of healing and dismembering this innocent bird. The twisted torture and healing of this creature the drow found made him some semblance of intrigue, and he smiled before seeing Malachi's very human mother exiting the home. A celestial with a sadistic nature, completely human parents, and a very wooden village? The drow felt like it would start raining illusory blood in any minute. He was so happy. The drow then introduced himself to Malachi's parents as an instructor from a few villages over by the name of Riklaugath Dabban. He said that their son had demonstrated some excellent healing magic on a wounded bird and requested he be able to teach Malachi more at his library. But his parents, too hopeful to see their son get some good in him, let the drow occasionally school their boy every week without question. And Riklaugath could only smile warmly at their stupid ignorance, walking Malachi back with him through a bunch of fog in his black robes with a hood obscuring his face. But Riklaugath did train the boy, only he trained him in the art of causing pain when one placed their hands upon a person, or bashing their head in with a mace. Granted, the weapon-based combat was taught more by his adopted son, Cernan, a tiefling he'd found in a village that had been mysteriously decimated by a storm several years ago, and who mysteriously got amnesia mysteriously, while mysteriously being the only survivor mysteriously. But that really didn't matter. All that mattered was that Malachi was learning skills, and was taking a liking to the drow. This was especially important given Riklaugath's next move. When Malachi turned 14, Riklaugath decided it was time the boy learned what his library was really for, and, upon guiding Malachi to the basement, he introduced him to the Heralds of the Damned, a group of cultists all worshipping various deities who band together for one sole purpose: ending the world, an experience that can bring anybody much closer together. And Malachi, whose moral compass was all but backwards at this point, was eager to help. After all, he had spent the last 4 years learning how to murder with the drow. A cult wasn't really surprising. And while Malachi didn't necessarily want to end the world, any excuse to enjoy himself was good enough for him. Besides, he liked Riklaugath and Cernan. They liked him for who he was. And it was around this time that the nagging conscience Malachi had threw its hands in the air and quit trying. The next morning, Malachi was in the back of a wagon, sketching his burning village while Riklaugath finished loading his belongings into the bag. And once they were done and around 1 mile away, Riklaugath snapped his fingers and caused meteors to rain down on the village with his new apprentice. And Malachi, much like when he was younger, greatly enjoyed seeing the sky light up. This time, though, it had a touch more cries of unrelenting agony. Agony that made him so pleased he turned into a demon. Well, really, it was necrotic shroud, but shh, metaphors. After that, Malachi lived in the library. He took care of books, ran errands, chanted in guttural languages to summon mighty demons with the cultists, that sort of thing. Riklaugath was especially impressed by how quickly Malachi picked up Abyssal, all things considered. What was even more impressive, though, was how Malachi chose to spend his free time. When he wasn't doing menial tasks for Zernin or studying the history of Drow with Riklaugath, at 18 Malachi began teaching people who'd stumble into the library various things. His handsome angelic face made people calm around him, and his eagerness to teach people what he knew was tangible. Mostly because it meant sacrifices and gold became a common resource in the library, and a bloody fallen Aasimar became just as common a sight. The teaching also meant Malachi was getting plenty of practice as a healer, often being called upon when any of the cultists were injured or needed large amounts of their own blood. This was wonderful work for Malachi, but it also kept the young Celestial inside far more often than he liked. And it was for this reason, and many others, that Riklaugath decided to ask Malachi for some help with a project. The Herald of the Damned needed power. Deals with untrustworthy types were difficult, and more often than not ended with cultists dying. Riklaugath wanted something a bit more controllable and concrete to help aid him in global destruction, and what better option than ancient artifacts that Riklaugath had heard about? The Drow explained he had heard wind of some very powerful items located across the seas, and asked if Malachi was willing to search for some. He was 28 now, and a very capable cleric, who'd proven very loyal. Riklaugath had genuine faith in him, and he also knew Malachi was eager to get out of the stuffy library. And so Malachi agreed to search. Several weeks later, and Malachi hadn't so much as attempted to cast sending. Mental tweet. There were no messages at all, not a letter or person to be seen, and Riklaugath was worried. He could always find a better cleric, but Riklaugath liked Malachi. The fallen Aasimar was one he'd hoped to take his place one day. As while the Drow was only in his 200s, he always had an inkling that something would end his life at a point far sooner than at 800. And while Zernin would likely take up the mantle, Riklaugath would prefer he not know about the mystery that is his amnesia. Knowing Malachi, he'd probably just chuckle, and the cult really needed that. And this is what sparked Zernin to beg Riklaugath to let him find Malachi. Zernin wanted to prove himself to his father. Not only that, but he also cared deeply for Malachi, as if he were a brother, which he might as well be. And when arguing against it proved fruitless, Riklaugath finally conceded and told Zernin to either bring Malachi back alive, or bring back a weapon and his corpse so his efforts wouldn't be so meaningless. That, and to bring him back to life because, magic. Thus, Zernin left on those same seas in search of Malachi, not knowing that his dear friend had gotten himself tangled up in a fiasco with a group of equally concerning individuals that would have to face up against a vampire and his fucked up country in order to escape. Nor did Zernin know that he too was going to be forced to tangle with his own group of aimless travelers in an adventure filled with dinner parties and quintuple homicides. And that's the history of Malachi and his wonderful cult family. If you couldn't tell by that little bit at the end, our current campaign is Curse of Strahd. In it, I play Malachi, our wonderful Aasimar, as well as Zernin Dabban, the tiefling who wishes Malachi would remember to message him already. And I have to tell you, it is something else to be playing through the story with both of them. Like, oh my god, this chaos. Chaos everywhere. I'll probably talk more about those two parties in the future, if anybody's interested. In fact, I could get what everyone looks like and do a group drawing with everyone, but don't expect that anytime soon if I do plan on it. But, in any case, that's the end of today's video. If you liked my work, feel free to let me know. You can subscribe if you want for infrequent uploads, and to see more of my work at varying qualities, check out my DeviantArt linked in the description below. That's all, so have a nice day.